When I was a little girl, I was always protected by my older brothers. No one would dare try to start a fight with me as long as they knew they were around. We moved around a lot when I was growing up, so my brothers and I were often the new kids. When I was about 8 years old, we moved overseas to my dad's new duty assignment. We stayed in a temporary hotel until our permanent housing was ready. I decided one day that I was going to venture out of the hotel room without my brothers. So as I walked into the courtyard, I saw this group of girls around my age, and I thought it would be a good idea to approach them until I got closer. As I got closer, I heard one of the older girls saying, "My little sister can fight. My little sister can fight. My little sister can fight." She looked up at me and said, "Hey, you're about her age." And before I could know what happened, she pushed me into her little sister. We fell into the bushes, and her little sister started to pretend to fight me like this, waving her arms like an octopus. She didn't want to fight me. She didn't want to hurt me. But she knew if she didn't at least pretend to fight me, then that would not be the end of it with her sister. There are just some people that love a fight. They don't have to be provoked. Sometimes they fight themselves, other times they use others to fight for them. But there are just some people that love a fight. When I think of fighting in legal terms, I think of suing someone in court. Suing someone in court, that's one way to fight, but it's not the only way. As a lawyer, people often come to me seeking justice in civil cases, wanting to fight because they want some type of relief, financial relief, they want revenge, they want the other person to hurt the way that they hurt. That's in civil cases. But what about in criminal cases? When people are looking to fight in criminal cases or seeking justice, they usually think of punishment, rehabilitation, or restoration. Fighting is one way in court, but that's not the only way. Justice is defined as the practice of making things right, of creating balance when harm has been done, resolving conflicts, and treating people with dignity and accountability. Well, as a new lawyer, I wanted to advocate for those that couldn't advocate for themselves. I wanted to help those that were systemically poor, those that were young and naive, those that were dealing with mental illness and substance abuse. I remember one of my first trials. It was emotionally grueling. It lasted about 2 weeks. And the issue was whether or not to move forward with terminating my client's parental rights. They had followed the recommendations of the court. They did the treatment. They did the assessments. They had the supervised visits. But the amount of time that it took them to do that was too long for social services. And ultimately, my client's rights were terminated. I and my client were devastated. I felt like justice had failed my client. When I think about what could have been done, there could have been an opportunity to heal. The parties could have come together and addressed the harm and take accountability. When I think of justice, I think of healing. Healing is the act of curing or restoring to health, or the process of becoming well. I have a friend that had the most amazing mother. She was a miracle. She got really sick, and before they released her from the hospital, they sent her home with hospice care. Now, my friend and his 4 siblings took care of their mother. They resided with her They took such good care of her that she lived for another 15 years. One of the siblings that lived in the home, let's call him Dave, had a son, let's call his son Barry, who also resided in the home. And they had a tumultuous relationship. They were always fighting. One Sunday morning, the fighting escalated to the point where Barry pulled out a gun and shot and killed his father. Barry called his aunts and uncles who were away from the house that day. They came back to the home, called the police. Barry was arrested, and the courts got involved. The district attorney on the case had an idea that would allow this family to heal, and it's called restorative justice. The family had the opportunity to reconcile, repair the harm, take accountability, and Barry was released with time served. Healing is the act of curing or restoring to health, the act of being made well. When I think of healing and justice, I think of restorative justice. Restorative justice focuses on repairing the harm to people and communities and restoring relationships rather than punishing the offenders. It's rooted in the idea that a violation of crime, a crime or wrongdoing, it's not just a violation of the law, but it's a violation of people and trust. Now, there are many different restorative justice models, but mainly they're focused on, rooted in the idea of repairing relationships and allowing for that person that caused the harm to take accountability. Restorative justice is used mostly in criminal cases in the U.S., only in a few civil cases across the country. But I encourage you to consider restorative justice as a way of resolving conflict in civil cases. You don't have to just limit it to court in civil cases or criminal cases. This is something that you can practice in your everyday lives. You can practice it with your family, with your friends, in your communities, and especially at work. When I think of justice and healing, I think of restorative justice. Jack Kornfield says, "Our sorrows and wounds are healed only when we touch them with compassion." I believe that using restorative justice begins with compassion. It begins with the willingness to want to heal and move on from the hurt. That little girl in me, way back in that fight, rather than going after the little girl's sister, I wanted to connect with the little girl that I was in that fight with. And so we had a conversation and found out that neither of us wanted to fight. In fact, neither of us had even been in a fight before. But that conversation led to a lifelong friendship. So using restorative justice can be just as simple as wanting to move on from the pain and the hurt, addressing the harm, taking accountability for your actions, even if that means a simple apology letter. Consider using restorative justice so that you can move on and heal. Thank you.